So artificial intelligence, when it gets trained, ends up with pre-trained models that help it determine reality, whatever that means, whether it's generating images or languages and so on. But the question becomes, where do the pre-trained models that are in humans come from? Where are those being stored? Let's take a step back. How does artificial intelligence work? Because as we try to mimic the brain, which is what we're doing with things like neural networks, we start seeing things that we didn't realize by just observing our own brains. So AI essentially has three components. I'm going to try and make this as simple as I can. Greg, Chuck, you guys can correct me or add in color as necessary. But you have some sort of algorithm. This could be a generative pre-trained transformer, a GPT. This could be a neural network of some sort, a CNN, and so on. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of different tools that we use in AI to train something. So you have an algorithm. Then you have a data set. Well, that data set could be everything on the internet, like the large language models use. It could be a group of images that show animals that are labeled so you know which ones are which animals. We have some sort of data set. This is how that algorithm then learns. So the algorithm is its learning tool, and then the data set is the information. For humans, it's something like this is really crude, but like your IQ or ability to learn something, and then whatever experiences you've had in life, right? And then you have the objective function. So what is the goal of this thing? Is it to identify in this data set all of the caterpillars? Is it to identify some other animal or to find the fire in the forest that's, there's different technologies being used to do that, to spot forest fires and it's too much smoke in a certain area and so on from satellite imagery. Like whatever your goal is the third part. So we have our algorithm, we have our data set, and we have our objective function or goal. Now, how does that mimic humans? Because when I'm talking about doing this with AI, why is it set up that way? Because that's literally trying to mimic the most intelligent thing we've seen before, which is the human brain. So here's an example of where this gets pretty interesting. If I take and want to train an AI to identify a turtle, you're going to need maybe hundreds, maybe dozens of images in your initial training data set. So once I have that data set, I can take a new animal. So let's say this data set has 100 different animals in it, but it doesn't have a turtle in it. That now becomes a pre-trained model. It's a model that's designed to identify different types of animals. Hasn't seen a turtle, but now I can show it maybe half a dozen, maybe a dozen instead of dozens or hundreds. And it can get pretty good at it because it already has been trained in how to identify animals. That's what's called a pre-trained model. And so these can be very efficient. And so when we talk from a technical perspective, we'll use pre-trained models. Think of it like when I create a custom GPT. I'm using all of the training and all of the knowledge that ChatGPT has, but I'm just applying it to uploading a document that I have and just saying, okay, well, all of that information that you know how to read documents, how to interpret language, how to write language, just apply it to this 120-page document that I'm uploading to my custom GPT. So pre-trained model just allows it to access the information more quickly. The interesting part with humans is if I show a 2-year-old a picture of a turtle, they only need to see like one. And they could identify at a very high degree turtle after turtle after turtle, different species, different sizes, different colors. Like they just get it, which means somewhere in human brain is a pre-trained model. Or maybe it's not in the brain, maybe it's somewhere else. So that's our question for today is where is that pre-trained model stored? Where does that information come from? So
Brian, just to take that a step back slightly, what I heard there is the 2-year-old learns faster.
Learning faster isn't quite, I don't think it quite does it justice. It identifies things for some way, somehow. Like
so the structure's already there for the 2-year-old to understand that this is something unique, and that unique thing then gets saved as unique tortoise or unique bird or something. So the infrastructure exists.
Hold on.
Yeah, so whatever, I think you look at this from a few different perspectives, and this is getting more philosophical maybe than technical. um, is the child able to identify more data points of that image, right? Is it just
Right.
processing, or is it essentially at a higher resolution? And what we understand about things like GPT-4 in terms of the number of neural connections, the information processing, data storage, there isn't a hardware component that we're aware of at this point where the human brain exceeds that of the GPT, the AI. Those are on par, or the AI actually exceeds physically what's going on in the human brain, which then suggests this is why we're saying, okay, it's pre-trained model. It has some familiarity with this thing ahead of time. It's not learning it. So that was kind of the exception I had when you asked, Rob, okay, is it learning faster? That to me is implying it's initially looking at a new data set. And I'm saying, no, it has a pre-trained affinity for this information. And the example we're using, the turtle was one, but tastes, smells, touch, all these things develop when you watch a child, but there is still some level of, it knows good. It knows how to nurse. It knows how to survive to some degree, because if it doesn't know how to nurse, and we've been through this with our 4 kids, they're not every kid gets this perfectly, and there is training in that. And different kids certainly can struggle with it, but there's still some ability to swallow, to breathe, and then as they mature, identify things, even if it's like the first animal they've ever seen, even if it's the first ball they've ever seen. Like you show them one ball and they get what a ball is.
I think we have to go further back in the life of an organism. Go back to
I want
to start right there with the instruction set.
before we get there, I want to take one baby step back.
Okay.
That's a good giant step back. A lot of animals, like horses, as soon as they're born, they're able to stand up, walk, and run without seeing it, without knowing it, without they just do it. So there's something in them that says, I'm supposed to be born, stand up, and be able to run. Like their muscles are ready for it. Their brain is obviously it takes one try, but they're basically doing it.
They're ready to run. Yeah.
And so that's an example of a pre-trained model in this horse that is running. I don't know. They've never seen it. They've, never done it, but they're like, hey, here's how you run. Let me get up and do it. So that's an example of, the human one gets kind of tricky because it's like, oh, it's been seeing things for many years, blah, blah, blah. But Brian, you brought it back down to the breathing, the nursing, the basic life things. But then horses and other animals have these things, right? Where it's like, okay, they already have a pre-trained model to do blank. Okay. And now, Chuck, I'll let you move back to
Greg, that's where I was going with a lot of this stuff. I want to talk about, the single cell, that one thing that starts right there. It has an instruction set and it knows. Let's look at this from the science viewpoint of things. That all comes from DNA and RNA. So it has a certain set of instructions that were built in. And our scientific understanding would be that this has evolved over hundreds of millions of years as life has slowly grown. The genomes have changed and modified and everything. So from a science standpoint, everything has to be contained within that piece of code. And how many base pairs are there in a human genome? Do you guys know off the top of your head? Because I can't remember. 16 billion pairs or something?
It's around, it's a few billion.
Yeah,
I can ask GPT.
It's a lot of base pairs all stored out. It's so long that it's like 6 or 7 feet long or something, or meters. Hell, I can't tell meters from feet or whatnot, but it's a big long chain that's so thin you can't even see it, and it all gets wadded up into a ball and moves all around. And this is the mechanism by which all information that a living organism starts with. So, Greg, that information telling the horse to run, that's there. Like my chickens, when chickens get a certain age, the roosters start crowing, or they start scratching at the ground. There's behaviors that are built into the animal, and that all comes from that DNA. But I think what Brian is saying is it can't all come from right there. And I think there's something true to that. We don't quite really understand DNA. What we do understand is it's a fractal globule. Do you guys know what that is? It's okay, a fractal globule, you've got your DNA strand, it's all wadded up. Now remember, it's like 6, 7 foot long. It's all wadded up into a little bitty ball. Okay, it's all wadded in a ball. And it's that corkscrew, right? It's that double helix going down, but it's all wadded up in a ball. Now, a globule fractal, you can take one end of that DNA and start pulling, and it won't ever tangle. It's never tangled up. When it's all wadded up like that, it's not in a tangle. So it's also constantly moving like this. And it does some weird things while it's moving around. It creates what are called fractal antennas. You know what a fractal antenna is? Those are antennas that pick up certain wavelengths. That's how that's how DNA communicates with RNA, and that's how one cell communicates with another cell. That's how our nerves are able to take information. Like when I run my fingernail across that, I can feel that, and how I get that information across is all sent through electricity, through our cells, and it's all based on how we're communicating back and forth. And our DNA plays a huge role in that. So DNA does a lot more than just, it can't contain all the information, guys. It just can't. Even with 16 billion pairs, it just can't contain everything.
Before Brian jumps in, before we even move on, just from a very normal, everyday perspective, this is when you know that magic exists. Like this, it's just incredible, right? Like there's no other word for it. It's just mad. Like this is when you know you can do anything. Like anything is possible because of what you just explained. Anyway, I'll let Brian jump in.
So I looked it up. There's 3 billion base pairs. So you were right, Chuck. Good job there. Yeah, so your points bring up a few additional, like I would say prior to that point. So the core question then becomes not where is the pre-trained model in our developed brains, but where does the pre-trained model come from when you have conception? Right? Like all of the information, all of those sensory information, visual information, so on, the ability to know and understand language, like don't take that for granted. We're like not all animals can do that. That all had to come down to the point of conception being there. That's why I'm saying it's a pre-trained model. It had to be in there at the very beginning because it couldn't have been learned if it's literally the first set of words that I'm saying or the first, images that I'm seeing and so on. And you could still identify them in a much better level than what we currently see with AI. So where's the gap there? The other piece there is information theory. So you kind of skipped right over that one, Chuck. Which is I have communication and I have information that I have to send, but there are a few pieces for information to be information. It has to have an encoder, a transponder, and a decoder. Right? So if I have one cell and I have information stored within the DNA that says to replicate or whatever, it has to communicate that to other parts of that cell or to other cells if I'm a multicellular organism. How did that happen? Where did the information theory come from that they actually could communicate? And they could create a signal that gets encoded, that gets transferred, and then gets decoded, and they're all speaking the same language. And then do that in unison 1 trillion times. There is no, to my knowledge, any sort of laboratory experiment that explains how you go from no information to information. And this is where you get to the physical and the metaphysical. Information doesn't have physical components to it, right? Knowledge of mathematics, even if no human brain existed, mathematics would still exist within this universe, in an ordered universe, but it has no weight to it. It has no measurement to it. I can't measure mathematics and so on. And so information theory would say, okay, we have this information that gets translated, how do the cells replicate and what information they store and so on. But where did that come from? Big Bang tells us about matter and energy, time and space, but not information. And that gets deeper into the pre-trained model concept because that's just a more advanced version of the information is this pre-trained model. Have we gotten back to the core, the first principle?
Well, now I'm thinking about the Big Bang. I'm thinking about, okay, look, here's my problem with a lot of science and stuff. What the universe is 13.5 billion years old, right? That's what they're telling us. That's what science says. What's a year? A year is the amount of time it takes the Earth to go around the sun. Fellas, I don't want to be the one to freak you out, but 100 million years ago, the Earth took a different amount of time to go around the sun. And 100 million years before that, it took a different amount of time. Time doesn't really exist. That 13.5 billion years, that's a made up number. It's not based on any reality. No, you can't. Gravity and time are so tied up together that no, it wasn't 13.5 billion years ago, because you go back far enough and a year doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't even mean anything today. You go to a planet that's 10 times the size of the Earth, right? And you live in planet A and I live in planet B, like we're going to age differently. A year, it's all relative.
It's right.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. It's relative to matter and velocity, to speed.
But let's just say that.
So the 13 billion would have to be from whose perspective?
From
right?
whose perspective, exactly. From whose perspective, 13.5 billion years. In fact, if you follow the theory back far enough, you end up with what's called the habitable epoch. I'm sorry. You know what that is? That's a period of time in the universe when the entire universe was habitable, where the pressure system was equalized, where temperatures were all around between 50 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Is this true, or is this a theory?
Just know that. Look it up right now. Habitable epoch. Look it up. It's a real thing. Lasted hundreds of millions of years. In fact, if life were to develop, it would have developed then, because we had already had stars at that point, which means there were heavier elements that had already been created during that time frame. So if DNA were created, if life first existed in the universe and was created a scientific way, it would have happened during that time period, the habitable epoch. I keep wanting to call it epic, but epoch. That would have been the time frame in which life scientifically was created. The entire universe, guys, entire universe was habitable. Whole thing, oxygen. I mean, we had a.
It is obviously theoretical.
Well, absolutely theoretical. I would say it's almost a ludicrous notion. Because here's the thing: if you roll the universe back far enough, you know what happens? You end up before you were born. And frankly, the universe before I was born, it's a nonsensical thing. I didn't exist at that point. It doesn't matter.
Now we're getting back to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
There's nothing that I can do to change time from before I existed. However, mathematically, from the time I exist, yes, future affects the past, past affects the future. We know this. We know the future affects the past.
So do you have a theory on where the information came from?
Well, it's God, Brian. It's God. It's
the I think
source.
Another good analogy is you can have the rules to a baseball game, but it doesn't mean the baseball game is being played. But someone had to create the rules for that game.
The baseball game.
And then implement the matter and whatever to play that game. So this all comes back as where did the rules to the information, the universe. So Big Bang Theory had to have certain physical laws already in place in the universe to get it started. A lot of scientists are like, oh, the rules, the matter, and all that stuff just all happened by themselves.
Yeah.
You know, that comes back to the whole, has anything ever created itself? And the answer is no, there's no proof of anything's ever created itself. The first mover from Aristotle and back and back and back and back. And so that's the question.
Well, mathematically, we live in a white hole. You know what a black hole is, right? A black hole is what pulls in all matter. And a white hole is the exact opposite. Mathematically, they exist. That's what the Big Bang would be a white hole. You can't go into it because everything's being pushed out from it. It's just the mathematical opposite. It's a black hole going backwards in time. It's a balance thing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The universe balances.
Who's the one atheist, Greg, that I think his last name's Strauss or Krauss? But he basically summed it up by saying, science doesn't tell us why. It tells us how, tells us what, but it doesn't tell us why we have information. At this point, it doesn't tell us where it came from. And that gets to the core, where did it come from? The first mover, we talk about from a physical reality. What was the thing that created time, matter, space, and energy? It had to be something that existed outside of time, matter, space, and energy, which throw information in there. So it had to be something that was able to organize information and thought and create the information theory that things can be sent and communicated. All life requires that. And it had to start somewhere. And it had to start from no information to information to get to life. And then from single cell to multiple cell, there's a whole different level of communication. And now we're saying, okay, somewhere within the human being, human person, there is these capabilities for what we see in our pre-trained models. And it's interesting. We can verify this if you guys want to, because it sounds crazy every time I say it, but I swear I've verified this several times because it sounds so crazy. Is our DNA is genetically more similar to that of a male chimpanzee than of our spouses.
Oh.
Right? So think about that for a second. So if male chimps and male humans are genetically closer than male and female humans, then we start saying, okay, again, where did that pre-trained model of all of this information come from? Because theoretically, then we're getting closer to, well, why can't chimps do the things that we can do?
Right, genes expressed.
Is it that simple? Can I take a chimp and turn it into
so.
Planet of the Apes by expressing all their genes? I mean, that would be an amazing experiment for somebody to prove, hey, if I express the right genes, all of a sudden I have language, all of a sudden we have abstract thought, all of a sudden we have object permanence, and so on and so forth.
That's what Oliver was. Have you ever seen Oliver the chimp? I think he was a chimp, genetically a chimp, that had genes expressed that were not normal to be expressed. We can do that now with CRISPR. That's what CRISPR is really doing. We're just changing.
And has anybody turned a chimp into a human?
Well, not that we know of. I mean, well, that's the theory that what Oliver would.
All right, so let's have that philosophical question then.
Oh.
If right, so like the theological point would be, what makes humans uniquely valuable? It's our God-given soul. If you could take a chimp, which doesn't have a God-given, so it has a soul, it doesn't have a immortal soul that can have a relationship with its creator, whereas humans have an immortal soul that can have a relationship with their creator. All right, so a chimp doesn't. If you could take a chimp and allow it to express some genes and therefore have it develop rational thought and the hallmarks seeking truth, beauty, goodness, what are the other two, Greg? The divine, and
divine.
There's a fifth one. You'll come to me in a second, but these things that are hallmarks of the human that aren't hallmarks of other animals, what happens there? Would you argue that one, that's impossible, and if it happened, it would disprove God because now we have a soul, rational soul, and something that it shouldn't? Or would it be, oh, at that point, God added the soul when the genes were expressed a certain way?
Well, theologically, let's talk about souls. Let's talk about non-human souls. Theologically, do angels have souls?
Do what have souls?
Angels.
Angels are souls.
Okay, do they have physical bodies?
No. But they can manipulate matter.
They can manipulate matter, but they don't have physical bodies.
Right.
But in the Bible, they made it with humans. I mean, we've got those stories in the Bible, so they had to have been physical.
Right, because they can manipulate matter and give themselves physical presence.
Okay, all right. But they are soul. So if we took a chimp and we brought its intelligence up to the level of humans, the question here is whether or not it would have a soul, or a human soul, or an immortal soul.
Right. Or is the argument then from theology that that's never going to be possible because the pre-trained models that allow us to have our rational thought and recognize information are stored in the soul, which is immaterial, which comes from God, and there's no way you can manipulate the the DNA to get it there.
All right, I'm trying to think biblically if there's anything in the Bible at any point where God says, I will never give an immortal soul to anybody but humans. I'm just trying to think if there's anything in the Old Testament, New Testament. I'm just trying to think if God ever says he would never do that.
So say that one more time. What is your question?
Okay, so is there a point in the Bible where God says, "I will never give an immortal soul to anyone but humans"?
No. So for instance, there
Okay,
could be aliens, right? An alien race, someone we're not familiar with, light years away or in a different universe, that God has a relationship with and have immortal souls also.
lizard people, yeah.
But
Yep.
I think that's different
Well,
than,
I know
can I
Christ
take
said he was
my
going
dog?
10 sheep of another flock. I mean, that could be interpreted all kinds of ways.
I think it's a different question though, to say, hey, could another living being that God infused with a soul exist on a different planet? Yeah, I mean, there's no reason that there's nothing that says
Well,
that
I'm
couldn't
just
happen.
saying.
But could
Well,
I take something that currently has a mortal soul and give it an immortal soul? That's a very different question.
I don't think we would be given it the immortal soul. I think that's the whole thing right there. By the grace of God, perhaps we could, but well, I don't think.
Yeah, so that would be the question, Chuck, is I see it going one of two ways. One, hey, you did X, Y, or Z, and therefore God decided to add the soul. So that's one argument you can make. Or there's just no possible way for the seat of rationality, the seeking of the five transcendentals, to exist or to ever be given to something that wasn't conceived with a soul.
Well, that sounds like you're bossing God around at that point, so I don't like that one. God
It sounds like what?
Sounds like you're bossing God around at that point. I mean, I don't want to tell God what he can or can't do. I mean, if he wants to make a burrito so hot he can't eat, I'm sure he can do it, and then turn around to eat it. My point being that we run
That would be a
into
logical contradiction, and God can't be a logical contradiction or create a logical contradiction.
absolutely. God can do anything he wants. Are you telling me that I can mentally logic out something and God can't?
Well, no, you can't.
Actually,
God can't be a contradiction. So you can't say, God,
of
create
course
me
he
a round
can.
triangle, right?
He could. Just
No, you
because our
can't.
brains can't understand it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, Brian. Here, is the earth flat? Do we live on a flat earth?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, we absolutely live on a flat earth. So you're a flat earther now because we live on a flat earth. It's a perspective thing.
Yeah, but
I
a
mean,
round triangle is not a perspective thing. It's a definition thing.
Yeah, no.
A
It's a
triangle
whole
by definition
definition.
has three sides.
All
That's
right.
if
I
it
can
doesn't,
see
it's not a
three sides.
triangle.
Can you see three sides to a sphere?
Can you have three sides on a sphere? No.
You can't.
No.
Can't only have three
Why?
sides on a sphere. You can have three sides to a sphere if you get to break it small enough to infinity small pieces. But you can't only have three sides.
Yeah, you can. You've got a front, you've got a back, and you've got an edge. If you're looking at it two-dimensionally, you've got three sides.
That's not a
You can
sphere
plot
then.
it. You
Spheres
can
by
still plot
definition
it
is three
out.
dimensions.
See, you can still plot it out. The point being, there's no such thing as a contradiction if you look deep enough into it.
Yeah, well,
I
we're gonna have to
believe
disagree on that because God can't be a contradiction.
absolutely can. Is God pure good? Is God completely good?
Yes.
So he made the devil. He made something evil, but he's completely 100% good. So
The devil was not evil when he started.
Yes, God did make the devil as a good being.
Well, yes, he did. He made him to test us. This is the devil's world we live in, boys and girls.
Right, but he made a good thing. He made a
That
angel,
sounds
and
like
that
a
angel had free
contradiction to
will to
me,
choose.
Brian. That
What's
sounds
that?
like it might ought to be a contradiction.
That's not a contradiction at all.
It's not. He made evil for good purposes.
No, he didn't make evil. I'm not saying he made evil. I'm saying he made good.
So what made evil if it wasn't God?
Evil is the
Is-
lack of good. Meaning
Is it?
you have a choice, yes. That's like darkness is the lack of light.
So God didn't create it, though. That's what I'm hearing. It's something that God didn't create. It existed before or outside of God.
No, it was, how would we put this? It was Okay, so I
It's
could
a
take this two
brain
ways.
twister, isn't it? It's a brain
No,
twister.
you can take this two ways. What is evil? So how do you define evil?
Okay.
Is it really evil? Because people make things evil that aren't evil. People make say, "Hey, you cut me off, you're evil." Like, okay, that's not evil. What's evil? So that's
Right.
one way we can
Right.
take this.
Well, can we agree that evil does exist?
It does. So evil exists like darkness exists.
Okay.
Darkness is the lack of light, right? So God made light. The fact that somebody covered it over because they had the free will to do that doesn't mean that God made the darkness.
So here's the next mind twister for you. If God made light, who made dark?
Well, nobody. So the lack of light is the darkness. You're not making the darkness,
But it existed before there was light.
did it?
Well, didn't it? It's a chicken
No,
egg thing, man.
it didn't exist. But the one didn't exist before the other.
Of course it
You
did.
can't have darkness if how?
That's what it starts off with in the Bible. It was dark. And then
Yeah,
there
but
was
that's
light.
because that's a simple way to understand it. It's not the reality.
Okay, I'll explain this for everybody. All right, look. We're three-dimensional creatures living a fourth-dimensional life. Time does not exist. Okay, this moment right now is the only moment that exists. Past doesn't exist, future doesn't exist. It's just this right now that exists. That's it.
You need to read some more Aquinas, Chuck.
Huh?
You need to read some Thomas Aquinas. Read the
Thomas Aquinas?
Summa Theologica, yeah, because your understanding of good and evil and free will is needs to be updated. It's
I don't
lacking.
think so, Brian. I think the difference here is I believe in a paradoxical universe because I'm not going to deny the things I've seen. I mean, if Thomas Aquinas thinks that there was no darkness before there was light, then I think he needs to think about math and time.
He doesn't. He doesn't think there was no darkness before light, but
he doesn't believe there was darkness before there was light.
No, I'm saying he does. He has no problem with that.
Okay.
And he does think about time and math and all of that as well. And it also depends on, there's a difference between a conceptual contradiction and a physical contradiction, right? So there has been coding experiments or whatever where you have a null, I forget what they call it, but it's like a null impossible or an impossible null situation. But that's different than a physical reality null impossible situation, right? Like imaginary numbers.
Well, it's like Einstein saying E equals mc squared. Sure, it works on paper, but there's no place in the entire universe where energy equals mass times speed of light squared. It does not exist. It is a logical fallacy. So think about that. E does not equal mc squared. It doesn't. Nowhere does that exist. Nowhere.
So then you come to the whole like, oh, if it's mathematically correct, does it make it correct? Like string theory. Oh, you had to build 12 or 11 different dimensions to make string theory work. Okay, it works mathematically. Is that actually the most, does that match reality the best? And that's when it comes in the question is what matches reality the best? And so theoretical, yeah, there's a lot of theoretical things, a lot of, logical contradictions in logic, like, oh, the king of the US is bald. Well, first off, you could say that's false because there is no king, but if you have no king, then how could the king be bald? And so that is a logical contradiction in a sense that you can prove out using logic, right? That says, hey, this is a invalid whatever statement, whatever they call that.
I don't know. Elvis was pretty bald there, Greg. And I'm pretty sure most people call him the king. So I think
not of the United States, though.
got that one.
Not of the United States, though. He's just the king.
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of folks who consider that man the king of the United States.
That's true. That's true. But that's the kind of thing it is. So it's like what matches reality the best, and reality includes physical reality. And so that's where I think it ties in. You have to have both the theoretical reality and all the mathematical craziness has to also match physical reality. And that's when you get the two together. And that's
right. So who
it's
made
an interesting one. It's definitely interesting because it's hard to know what reality is physically, because we don't take logical and non-physical things, basically information and metaphysical things and the physical things, and tie them together in a very structured way. Most people can't do that, right? You have your metaphysical people who are like, oh, energy this, energy that, energy this, that, the other thing. It's like, what energy are you talking about? Is it the physical energy? Is it some other third kind of energy you're talking about? Is it whatever? Cool. But how does that actually equate to really what's going on in physics? Then you have your physical people who are like, oh, this physics is all there is, and leave out all the rest.
The
There are
reality is, if logical contradictions exist, there's no way of knowing truth.
Oh,
so I think you have to define what the logical contradictions are. There are physical logical contradictions. So the law of contradictions says you can't have a ball that is here that is both red and blue in the same way, same way, same way,
Same way,
something. Yeah,
same time. Yeah, something
yeah,
like that.
something like that. But that doesn't mean you can't have some kind of logical formula that isn't that could be two ways, right? So that's the difference between the two. Like, yeah, they've proven that you can't have that. And what'd you say, Chuck?
I could work out how to do that. A ball that's blue and red at the same time.
In the same way, same space, same being. I
I
forget
mean,
the
is it one person that's experiencing the blue and the red, or is it two different people? One sees it blue, one sees it red.
One person.
One person sees blue and red at the same time. So you have to see both different frequencies. Well, you got a left brain and a right brain.
Obviously, two different
I think you
people is
have
two
to
different
thought.
perspectives.
But even your two brains, if your one eye sees it differently than the other, it's not in the same respect and same way.
Yeah, you're seeing it from one from the other.
Yeah, those are two different respects in two different ways. So it actually doesn't break the law of contradiction, non-contradiction, because that's not in the same way, the same manner, same respect.
Right.
So, but anyways, that's that. How does this all wrap back to what we originally started, which was the pre-trained models? Which I think is the whole purpose of this is that there is something more to living creatures than a neural network, brain, whatever you want to call it. And that's what this pre-trained model is. And where does it come from? At this point, the best theory, literally the best theory, is God, and no one has proved anything better. And if you do have a better theory or better proof, I am all for seeing that personally, because I like to push my knowledge and push my understanding. So please share that, because there are a lot of theories out there. Most of them do not hold up.
You know, I think the problem with the conversation around God is so many different people have a different interpretation of what that word means.
Correct.
There's people who see the candle smoke God that you see from the pews at the church, you know, and then there's people who it's just a different interpretation. So I think
correct, and that's why you have to be very precise with your definition of what God is. Obviously,
otherwise you get atheists coming up with simulation theory, and then they all think we live in a Nintendo or something. And
yeah, or
stupid after a while.
Yeah, correct. Or even spaghetti monster God, who's something that's floating out in the middle of the thing that's like, that's not a God. That's not what we're referring to. Yeah, no one believes in that God, exactly.
Well,
so that's why
the most fallacious God is the created God. Right? That's the most common. Oh, well, who created God? Well, if somebody created it, it's not God.
There you go.
God is the uncreated. It's the first mover. It's the beginning. There's nothing before that.
Alpha, Omega, beginning and end. It's kind of all around.
Yeah. So the arguments that Richard Dawkins and those guys put out are about, well, who created God? Is like, we agree. No, nobody created God. We're on the same page here.
How did Dawkins ever learn to tie his shoes? The man makes the most asinine, idiotic arguments for everything I've ever heard. I'm not even sure. maybe we should. All right, sorry.
So he definitely
He just
like
irks me, and people listen to him, and that irks me even more. It's like, do you people even have a brain? Are you hearing what the man is saying? Can you make it? Can you make any kind? Obviously, their internal models are broken.